Not a journey across a country or a continent, not even a journey across a century. We are going back much further than that. We're going back to a time so ancient that the very air smelled different. The stars overhead were arranged in patterns no human eye has ever seen. The continents sat in positions no map has ever drawn. And we're going to discover something that most people never stop to consider. Something quiet and profound and endlessly strange. We are going to discover that you and the dinosaurs are connected. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally, biologically, cosmically connected. That the creatures who shook the earth for 165 million years left something behind in the very world that made you possible. That without the dinosaurs, there would be no you. That connection is the story we are going to trace tonight, slowly and gently, from the very beginning of the age of great reptiles all the way to the extraordinary present moment in which you are lying here, breathing quietly, letting the ancient story wash over you like warm water. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this one, subscribe. I post stories like this every week. Anyways, back to our journey. Let your eyes stay closed, let your breathing find its own slow rhythm, and let the story begin. There is a question that almost every human child asks at some point in their short life, usually somewhere between the ages of 4 and 7, usually with enormous eyes and slightly breathless excitement. The question is this: were dinosaurs real? And the answer, the extraordinary, verifiable, scientifically documented answer, is yes. They were absolutely, completely, overwhelmingly real. But here is the thing about that reality. It is a reality so vast and so deep and so far beyond ordinary human experience that we have never fully reckoned with it. We talk about dinosaurs in museums and in movies and in children's picture books, but we rarely sit quietly and let the full weight of their existence settle over us. We rarely let ourselves truly feel how long they were here, how completely they shaped this planet, and how much of that shaping survives in the world you're breathing in right now. So tonight, let us begin by doing exactly that. Let us begin by simply sitting with the reality of the dinosaurs, not the exaggerated versions from films, not the cartoon versions from children's stories, the real ones, the actual creatures who walked and breathed and hunted and nested on this planet for so many millions of years that the number itself becomes almost meaningless without help. 165 million years. Say that slowly to yourself. 165 million years. Human civilization, the oldest traces of organized human society, goes back perhaps 12,000 years. All of recorded human history, every civilization ever built, every war ever fought, every city ever raised and fallen, all of that fits inside a span of roughly 5,000 years. The dinosaurs were here for 165 million years. That is 33,000 times longer than all of human civilization combined. That is not a poetic comparison. That is arithmetic. That is simply what the numbers say. If you tried to walk backward through dinosaur time at the rate of 1 step per year, you would walk for 165 million steps before you reached the beginning of the age of dinosaurs. If each of those steps covered 1 meter, you would have walked 165,000 kilometers. You would have circled the Earth more than 4 times, and each step would represent just 1 year of the dinosaurs' reign on this planet. That is how long they were here. That is the scale of what we are talking about. And now consider what they did with all that time. The dinosaurs were not a single kind of creature, any more than all mammals today are a single kind of creature. They were an incredibly diverse dynasty of animals that spread into every environment on Earth, adapted to every challenge the planet could throw at them, and evolved into forms so varied and so extraordinary that we are still discovering new ones every year. New species pulled from ancient rock, new relatives added to the family tree, new behaviors inferred from fossilized bones and preserved footprints and ancient eggs. There were dinosaurs the size of sparrows. There were dinosaurs the size of 10-story buildings. There were dinosaurs with crests on their heads that they may have used to call to one another across misty ancient valleys. There were dinosaurs with armored backs and spiked tails. There were dinosaurs with horns arranged in patterns so elaborate that even now we argue about what they were for. There were dinosaurs that hunted in packs, coordinating their movements with a kind of social intelligence that surprises even seasoned paleontologists when they look at the fossil evidence. There were dinosaurs that sat on their nests and turned their eggs and guarded their young with the fierce protectiveness of modern birds, because that is exactly what they were doing, because that kind of devoted parental care was part of who they were. And there were dinosaurs that flew, not with featherless reptilian wings, but with actual feathers, actual flight feathers structured and pigmented and aerodynamically precise. Small theropod dinosaurs that launched themselves from ancient branches and soared above forests that no human eye has ever seen. We know this now with a confidence that would have astonished paleontologists just 50 years ago. We know it from beautifully preserved feathered specimens from China, from analyses of melanosomes inside fossilized feathers that tell us the actual colours those ancient animals wore, from the wing feathers of Archaeopteryx and its many relatives frozen in the postures of flight 150 million years ago. The evidence is overwhelming, and it changes everything about how we understand the dinosaurs. Because if dinosaurs had feathers, if they nested and nurtured and called to each other and hunted in coordinated groups, then they were not the cold, slow, stupid lizards that popular imagination once made them. They were something far more extraordinary. They were warm, living, breathing, socially complex animals with behaviours and relationships and inner lives that would be recognisable, in some vague ancestral way, to the birds you hear singing outside your window in the morning. And this is where the story starts to get strange and wonderful and quietly astonishing, in ways that most people never fully grasp. Because those birds outside your window are not the descendants of dinosaurs in some loose metaphorical sense. They are not creatures that share a distant common ancestor with dinosaurs the way humans share a distant common ancestor with fish. They are dinosaurs. Right now, in the living present, there are approximately 10,000 species of living dinosaurs on the surface of this earth. They are called birds, and every time you hear one sing, every time one lands near you or crosses the sky overhead or tucks its head under its wing to sleep, you are witnessing the continuation of a dynasty that has been unbroken for more than 200 million years. That is one thread of the connection between dinosaurs and the world you live in, but it's only the first thread. There are many more, and they go deeper and stranger than most people ever imagine. Let us start, though, at the very beginning. Let us go back to a time before the dinosaurs were anything more than a modest experiment in a world still being rebuilt from catastrophe. Because understanding what the dinosaurs were requires understanding what they came from, and understanding what the world was like before they took over, and understanding the long, patient journey that brought them from small, marginal, unremarkable animals to the undisputed rulers of every continent on Earth. That journey begins not with triumph, but with the quietest kind of survival, with a handful of small creatures in a devastated world, finding ways to keep breathing when almost everything else had stopped. The world that existed before the dinosaurs became dominant was a world in recovery, not from a single catastrophe, but from the worst catastrophe in the entire history of complex life on Earth. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, which occurred approximately 252 million years ago, had killed roughly 95% of all species on the planet. Marine ecosystems that had been building in complexity for hundreds of millions of years were essentially erased. Forests that had covered vast regions of the ancient supercontinent collapsed. The dominant animal groups that had ruled the land were nearly gone. What survived was a collection of refugees, small, stress-hardened organisms that had found ways to endure in whatever scraps of survivable environment remained. Early reptiles, primitive amphibians, the ancestors of the mammal-like animals called synapsids that had once been the dominant large animals and would now spend the next 150 million years being marginal. And somewhere in this scattered, struggling community of survivors were the very earliest members of the group that would become the dinosaurs. They were not impressive. They were small, bipedal animals, probably no larger than a medium-sized dog at most, running on their hind legs through an ecosystem that was still very much in the process of putting itself back together. They were not dominant. They were not particularly numerous. They were, by most accounts, unremarkable members of a recovering world that had no obvious reason to single them out as the future masters of the planet. But they had something. A combination of characteristics that, while not immediately decisive, would become extraordinarily valuable as the world continued to change and the competitive landscape shifted around them. They had an upright posture with legs positioned directly under their bodies, rather than sprawling out to the sides the way most reptiles walk. This gave them efficiency of movement that their competitors lacked. They had what appears to have been an elevated metabolism, something approaching warm-bloodedness in at least some lineages, which allowed them to stay active in conditions where cold-blooded animals would slow down and become sluggish. And they had, perhaps most importantly, a body plan of remarkable versatility, a structural framework that could be scaled up or down, modified in almost unlimited ways, adapted to almost any environment or diet or ecological role without losing its fundamental coherence. That versatility would prove to be the dinosaurs' greatest inheritance. Not their size, not their strength, not any single feature of their biology, but the sheer evolutionary flexibility of the basic design, the ability to become almost anything. The environment that would reveal this versatility was coming. Something was about to happen to the Earth that would change everything for the small, marginal ancestors of what would become the most successful land animals in the history of the planet. Something wet and relentless and world-transforming was gathering in the sky. And when it arrived, the dinosaurs were ready, not because they planned it, not because they could see what was coming, but because the qualities they happened to carry were exactly what the new world would reward. Let your breathing slow a little more as we go forward. The story is carrying us gently backward through time, and there is no rush. The ancient world has been waiting 200 million years for us to visit. It will wait a little longer while you settle deeper into rest. The Triassic period, which spanned from roughly 252 million years ago to 201 million years ago, was a time of enormous environmental upheaval. The supercontinent Pangaea, that vast gathering of all the world's land masses into a single enormous body, was beginning to fracture and drift apart. New ocean basins were opening, sea levels were changing. The climate, already extreme on Pangaea's vast interior, was being reorganized by the shifting geography. And then came the rain. The Carnian pluvial episode, approximately 234 million years ago, brought a period of dramatically increased rainfall that lasted roughly 2 million years. Volcanic activity pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, global temperatures rising, the hydrological cycle going into overdrive, deserts that had dominated Pangaea's interior for millions of years transforming into swamps and forests and vast freshwater systems. It was in this transformed, wet, unstable world that the dinosaurs had their first opportunity to prove what they were. The animals that had dominated the dry, stable world of the early Triassic struggled in the new conditions. Their food sources disappeared, their nesting sites flooded, their territorial ranges were disrupted, and the small, adaptable, metabolically flexible dinosaurs moved into the spaces the dying groups left behind. What followed was one of the most extraordinary episodes of evolutionary expansion in the history of life on Earth. Within just a few million years of the Carnian pluvial episode, dinosaurs had diversified from a handful of small species into dozens of distinct forms. Within 10 million years, they had spread across every major landmass. Within 20 million years, they were already beginning the transition to the giants that popular imagination associates with the word dinosaur. The story of that expansion is the story of life finding its opportunity in chaos. It is the story of creatures that had spent millions of years being marginal, suddenly finding themselves in a world where their particular combination of qualities was exactly what survival required. And it is the story of a dynasty beginning, a dynasty that would last for 165 million years and leave marks on this planet that we are still discovering and still learning to read. Let that sink in gently as your mind drifts. 165 million years. The world was theirs, and in ways that most people never fully appreciate, it still carries their signature. It still bears the traces of their passing. The soils beneath your feet, the air in your lungs, the birds in your trees, the very rhythms of the ecosystems that sustain your life, all of it shaped by the long reign of the dinosaurs. We will spend the night tracing those connections. We will follow them deep into the biology of your own body. We will follow them into the history of the Earth itself. We will follow them into the strange and ancient territories of human mythology and cultural memory. And by the time we are done, the word dinosaur will mean something different to you than it did when we began. It will mean something closer to family. But first, We need to understand something fundamental about the nature of evolutionary inheritance. We need to understand what it means to be connected to creatures who lived and died long before your earliest ancestors existed. Because the connection between humans and dinosaurs is not a simple thing. It is layered and subtle and runs through multiple channels simultaneously. It is written in genes and bones and ecosystems and atmosphere and cultural memory. It requires a kind of patient, layered understanding to fully appreciate. And patient, layered understanding is exactly what a quiet night is for. So let your body relax a little more. Let the thoughts of your day dissolve like morning mist. You're in the deep past now, and the deep past is a place of extraordinary stillness. 220 million years ago, the forests are strange. The air smells of rain and resin and ancient earth. And somewhere in the green dimness, a small bipedal animal is picking its way through the undergrowth, its eyes bright and alert, its movements quick and precise, its body carrying possibilities that neither it nor anything else in that ancient forest could possibly comprehend. It is on its way to becoming something enormous, something world-shaping, something that will leave a mark so deep and so lasting that 220 million years later, a human being will lie quietly in the dark and feel, without quite knowing why, a resonance with that ancient creature, a recognition, a connection that crosses all the vast distance of time. That resonance is real. We are going to understand why. There is a kind of knowledge that lives in the body before it lives in the mind, a recognition that happens in the muscles and the blood before any conscious thought has formed. Most of us have felt it at some point, usually in the presence of something very large or very old or very wild, a stillness that comes over you, an alertness, a feeling of being simultaneously very small and very alive. Children feel it most reliably when they encounter dinosaurs for the first time. Not just curiosity, something deeper, something that bypasses the intellectual and goes straight to the somatic, the bodily, something that makes the hair stand up on the back of the neck and the eyes go wide and the breath come a little faster, as though some ancient part of the nervous system is recognizing something it has always known. That response is not irrational. It is not simply the excitement of encountering something large and unfamiliar. It is, at least in part, the body responding to something genuinely, biologically, ancestrally real. Because the connection between the human body and the bodies of dinosaurs is not metaphorical. It is structural. It is written in the architecture of the skeleton, and the organization of the nervous system, and the deep grammar of developmental biology that shapes every vertebrate animal from a single fertilized cell into a complex organism. Let us look at that architecture together. Let us look at what bones actually tell us. Start with the most fundamental fact of vertebrate anatomy, which is that all vertebrates share a basic body plan. All of us, fish and frogs and lizards and birds and mammals and humans, are built on the same underlying blueprint, a central axis of vertebrae, a skull at one end, a tail or its remnant at the other, two pairs of limbs, or the structural echoes of two pairs of limbs, positioned on either side of that central axis, ribs protecting the chest, a brain case housing the brain, an arrangement of sense organs clustered at the front end of the body near the mouth, where they can be most useful for finding food and detecting danger. This basic plan is so old that it predates the dinosaurs entirely. It goes back to the very first vertebrate animals that evolved in ancient seas more than 500 million years ago. The tiny, jawless, filter-feeding creatures that were the first animals to develop the internal skeletal framework that would eventually produce both the dinosaurs and you. Every vertebrate alive today carries that ancient plan in its body. Every bone you have echoes that deep ancestral architecture. But the connection between human bones and dinosaur bones goes beyond sharing a general vertebrate plan. It goes into the specific details of limb structure, joint architecture, and the arrangement of skeletal elements in ways that are genuinely illuminating when you sit with them quietly. Consider the hand. Your hand, the one resting against whatever surface is beneath you right now. 5 fingers, each built from a sequence of small bones called phalanges, connecting to longer bones in the palm called metacarpals, connecting to the wrist bones called carpals, connecting to the 2 long bones of the forearm called the radius, and the ulna, connecting to the upper arm bone called the humerus, connecting at the shoulder to the rest of the skeleton. That specific arrangement of bones, that particular sequence and organization, is called the pentadactyl limb, 5-fingered, and it is one of the most deeply conserved structures in all of vertebrate evolution. Dinosaurs had it too. The ancestors of all dinosaurs had 5 digits on their forelimbs, and even as different dinosaur lineages evolved and modified those limbs for different purposes, reducing the number of functional fingers, elongating certain bones for flight, developing new joint structures for new kinds of movement, the underlying pentadactyl plan remained legible beneath the surface changes. A tyrannosaur's tiny forearm, so famously small in proportion to its enormous body, still carried the basic architectural echoes of that ancient 5-fingered plan. An Archaeopteryx wing, stretched out in flight over a Jurassic forest 150 million years ago, was still built on the same fundamental framework as your arm. Modified almost beyond recognition, yes, but structurally, ancestrally, the same. This is what comparative anatomy reveals when you look closely enough. Not just surface similarities, but deep structural homologies. The same bones, descended from the same evolutionary origins, modified by millions of years of natural selection into forms appropriate for radically different ways of life, but still recognizably related underneath all those modifications. Your arm and a bird's wing and a dinosaur's forelimb are not analogous structures that happen to evolve similar shapes for similar functions. They are homologous structures, the same bones, carrying different jobs, tracing a lineage back through hundreds of millions of years to a common ancestor. Now let us go deeper. Let us leave the visible skeleton and move into developmental biology, because this is where the connection between humans and dinosaurs becomes truly extraordinary and quietly mind-bending. Every vertebrate animal, from a fish to a bird to a human being, develops in the same basic way. It begins as a single fertilized cell. That cell divides and divides again, and the growing cluster of cells organizes itself into layers, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, the endoderm, that will go on to produce different types of tissue. The basic architecture of the embryo follows a conserved developmental program that is almost identical across all vertebrates in its early stages. This was discovered in the 19th century by a German scientist named Ernst Haeckel, who noted the remarkable similarity between vertebrate embryos at early stages of development. A fish embryo and a human embryo and a bird embryo, all at approximately the same early developmental stage, look startlingly similar. They have gill slits, or the structural precursors of gill slits. They have tails or tail buds. Their overall body organization is almost indistinguishable from one another. Haeckel's specific conclusions have been refined and corrected by later science, and some of his methods were flawed, but the basic observation that early vertebrate embryos show profound structural similarities is genuinely true and is supported by an enormous body of modern developmental genetics. The reason for those similarities is that the developmental programs driving embryonic growth are very ancient and very conserved. The same regulatory genes, the Hox genes and other master regulatory sequences, are directing the basic organization of vertebrate bodies across all the major lineages, in dinosaurs, in birds, in mammals, in humans. When a human embryo develops, it passes through stages that carry structural echoes of its evolutionary history. The pharyngeal arches, those structures in the embryonic throat region that in fish develop into gill arches, are present in human embryos too. In humans, they develop into different structures, parts of the jaw, the inner ear, the larynx, the bones of the neck, but their developmental origin is the same. They are the same ancestral structures, redirected by evolution toward different endpoints. The tail bud that appears in human embryos at around 4 weeks of development, and then is largely reabsorbed before birth, is another echo of this deep evolutionary history. Your spine ends in a coccyx, a small collection of fused vertebrae that is the vestigial remnant of a tail that your evolutionary ancestors had, and that the developmental program that builds your body still partially expresses before pulling back from. You were, very briefly in your embryonic development, building a tail. The same developmental program that once built the long, counterbalancing tails of theropod dinosaurs as they ran through ancient forests is still present in your genome, still active in your early development, still reaching, briefly, for a structure that evolution has decided you no longer need. That is how deep the connection goes, not just in the finished product of the adult skeleton, in the developmental program itself, in the ancient genetic instructions that your cells carry and read and interpret every time a new human life begins to build itself from a single cell. This shared developmental heritage runs through every system in the body. The basic organization of the vertebrate brain, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the immune system, all of these carry the marks of their ancient evolutionary origins. All of them are built according to plans that predate the dinosaurs and are conserved across all vertebrate life. But the dinosaur connection is not just about shared ancient heritage. It is also about specific traceable lines of descent. It is about the fact that some of the animals alive on Earth today are directly descended from dinosaurs, with an unbroken genealogical line connecting them to Triassic ancestors. We have mentioned the birds already, and we will spend much more time with them in the next part of our story. But even for mammals, for the group that includes us, the dinosaur connection is more direct than most people realize, because the dinosaurs did not just share a planet with the ancestors of mammals, they shaped those ancestors in profound and lasting ways. They created the selective pressures that produced the mammalian traits we carry today. They made us, in a real biological sense, by being here for so long and being so dominant and being so difficult to compete with. Consider what it means to have spent 150 million years as a small, nocturnal, mostly insectivorous animal living in the shadow of enormous predators. What does that do to a lineage over geological time? What does it select for? It selects for small size, at least to begin with, because small animals need less food and can hide more easily. It selects for warm blood, because warm-blooded animals can be active in the cool of the night, when cold-blooded dinosaurs are less active and less dangerous. It selects for acute senses, particularly hearing and smell, because animals that navigate by sound and scent can survive in the dark. It selects for intelligence and behavioral flexibility, because small, vulnerable animals survive not through physical dominance but through strategy. And it selects for the kind of devoted parental care, nursing young, protecting offspring, investing heavily in the survival of each individual, that characterizes mammals today, because when you're small and vulnerable, every offspring counts. All of these traits, every one of the characteristics that makes mammals recognizably mammalian, were shaped and refined during 150 million years of living in a world dominated by dinosaurs. The dinosaurs did not just coexist with our ancestors, they trained our ancestors. They created the selection pressures that produced the mammalian body and brain and behavioral repertoire. They made us adaptive, intelligent, warm-blooded, nurturing, sensory-rich creatures by being the dominant animals in a world that our ancestors had to find clever ways to survive. In this sense, we are the dinosaurs' creation, not biologically descended from them, but biologically shaped by them, refined in the crucible of their dominance, forged by the pressure of 150 million years of being the small, careful, clever animals who stayed out of the way of the large, powerful ones. There is something almost beautiful about this when you let it settle over you in the quiet, something that feels, if you let it, like gratitude, because everything that makes you specifically human, the intelligence, the sensitivity, the social complexity, the capacity for care, has deep roots in the mammalian adaptations that were forged in the age of dinosaurs. You carry within you the fruit of 150 million years of refinement under dinosaurian pressure. And now let us go even deeper into the architecture of the connection. Let us look at the place where the ancient history of life is most vividly and immediately present in your everyday experience. Let us look at the human brain. The human brain is not a new thing. It is not a freshly designed structure built from scratch for the specific purpose of supporting human consciousness. It is an ancient structure, built up in layers over hundreds of millions of years, each layer added to earlier foundations rather than replacing them. And those earlier foundations carry the evolutionary history of the vertebrate nervous system in their structure. The deepest, oldest part of your brain, the brainstem and the structures immediately surrounding it, is sometimes called the reptilian brain, though neuroscientists today prefer more precise terminology. What this colloquial term is pointing at is real. The basic architecture of the brainstem, the regulation of breathing and heart rate and basic arousal and sleep and wakefulness, these are managed by brain structures that are deeply conserved across all vertebrates. The same basic structures that manage these fundamental life processes in the dinosaurs manage them in you. You breathe the way you do, your heart beats the way it does, you fall asleep and wake up the way you do, because of neural machinery that has been conserved across hundreds of millions of years of vertebrate evolution. The structures above that ancient core, the limbic system with its emotional processing and memory formation and motivational systems, are a mammalian development. They are more recent in evolutionary terms, built on top of the older core during the long history of mammal evolution. But even here, the dinosaur connection is present, because the selective pressures that shaped mammalian, emotional and social complexity were created by the long coexistence with dinosaurs. The emotional systems that make you capable of bonding with others, of feeling fear and relief and the specific comfort of safety, of caring for dependent young with the fierce investment that characterizes mammalian parenthood, these systems were not built for the modern world. They were built for a world in which every quiet moment was borrowed time in the shadow of enormous predators, a world in which the cost of inattention was death, a world in which the warmth of being small and hidden with others of your kind in a burrow in the dark was not just comfort but survival. That ancient world, the Mesozoic world of the dinosaurs, is present in your nervous system right now. The neural systems that make you find comfort in warmth and darkness and quiet, that make you relax when surrounded by the sounds of life and tense in silence and openness, that make you feel safest when small and enclosed and with others. Those systems were shaped in the age of dinosaurs by the experience of living small and careful in a world of giants. You're lying in the dark right now, perhaps covered by something warm, perhaps hearing the sounds of others nearby or the quiet sounds of a familiar space. And some ancient part of your nervous system, a part that has been conserved through more than 200 million years of evolution, is registering those conditions as exactly right, as safe, as good. That recognition that settling into rest is not just personal, it is ancestral. It goes back through a lineage of small, warm-blooded, night-active animals who survived in the shadow of the dinosaurs by finding safety in exactly these conditions. By making exactly this choice, night after night, generation after generation for 150 million years. You are doing what your ancestors did, and their ancestors before them, all the way back to small, quick, bright-eyed creatures making their careful way through a Jurassic night, while enormous animals slept, and the stars overhead had never been seen by human eyes. That lineage connects you to the dinosaurs more surely than any bone or fossil or evolutionary chart. It connects you through the lived experience of your nervous system, through the deep bodily knowledge that rest and warmth and quiet are good, through the ancient mammalian certainty that surviving the night is its own kind of triumph. Sleep a little more deeply. You're safe in this story. The Mesozoic is 200 million years away. The giants are long gone. All that remains is the lesson they taught your ancestors, written quietly in the architecture of your sleeping brain. There is a moment, if you let yourself have it, when an ordinary bird becomes extraordinary. It does not take much, just the willingness to slow down and look, really look, at what is actually in front of you, at the scaled feet gripping a branch, at the arrangement of bones in a folded wing, at the way a bird tilts its head and fixes one sharp eye on something that interests it, with an expression of focused, ancient attention that has no particular name in human language but is unmistakably present. When you slow down enough to see it, something shifts. The bird stops being a bird in the ordinary sense and becomes something else, something older, something that has been here since before any mammal ever opened its eyes on the surface of this planet. You're looking at a dinosaur, a living, breathing, flying, singing dinosaur, descended in an unbroken line from the theropods that stalked Triassic and Jurassic and Cretaceous landscapes, carrying in its body and its behaviors and its genes the inheritance of 230 million years of continuous dinosaurian existence. That fact, once you have let it properly in, changes the morning completely. Every bird outside the window becomes a window into deep time. Every sparrow and crow and gull and pigeon becomes a living fossil in the truest sense of that often misused phrase. Not a relic unchanged from ancient times, but a continuous living expression of a lineage that has never once been broken, that ran through the great extinction 66 million years ago and came out the other side, that has been adapting and diversifying and filling ecological roles for longer than any other living lineage of land vertebrates. 10,000 species, That is the current estimate for the number of living bird species on Earth. 10,000 distinct expressions of dinosaurian biology, each one the product of millions of years of refinement within a specific environment, each one carrying a unique combination of behaviors and physiologies and adaptations, each one a thread in the vast ongoing tapestry of dinosaurian evolution. And when you add those 10,000 living species to the enormous diversity of non-avian dinosaurs, the hundreds of known species from the fossil record, and the many more that certainly existed and left no preserved evidence, the picture of dinosaurian diversity becomes almost incomprehensibly rich. This was not a simple or limited lineage. This was one of the most successful, diverse, and enduring groups of animals that has ever lived on this planet. Understanding how birds got here, understanding the specific evolutionary path that led from the earliest dinosaurs to the extraordinary diversity of living birds, requires understanding the deep evolutionary history of the theropod dinosaurs, the group within the dinosaur family tree that gave rise to birds. The theropods were a major division of the dinosaur lineage that first appeared in the Triassic period and persisted all the way to the present day in the form of birds. They were bipedal, meaning they walked on two legs, with their forelimbs freed from the demands of locomotion, and that freedom of the forelimbs turned out to be one of the most consequential accidents of anatomy in the history of life. In the early theropods, those freed forelimbs were used primarily for grasping prey. They had flexible wrists and mobile fingers, and were well suited for grabbing and holding. As theropod evolution proceeded, different lineages modified those forelimbs in different ways for different purposes. Some lineages reduced the forelimbs dramatically, ultimately producing the tiny, seemingly vestigial arms of the largest carnivorous theropods. Other lineages went in the opposite direction, developing longer arms with increasingly wing-like proportions. The line that led to birds did the latter, and the evidence for this transition is now so complete and so detailed that it is one of the best documented evolutionary transitions in the entire fossil record. We have fossils of theropods at essentially every stage of the transition from ground-dwelling, predatory dinosaur to flying bird. We have Sinosauropteryx, a small theropod from China with a covering of simple, filamentous proto-feathers. We have Caudipteryx, with more clearly developed feathers on its arms and tail but apparently not yet capable of powered flight. We have Microraptor, with well-developed flight feathers on all four limbs. We have Anchiornis and a suite of other small feathered theropods from the extraordinarily rich fossil beds of northeastern China. And we have Archaeopteryx, perhaps the most famous transitional fossil in all of paleontology, a creature so perfectly intermediate between non-avian dinosaur and bird that when the first specimens were described in the 19th century, the scientific community recognized immediately the significance of what they were looking at. What all of this evidence tells us is that feathers evolved before flight. Feathers appeared in dinosaurs for purposes other than flying. Insulation, perhaps. Display, almost certainly, given how elaborate the feather patterns of some non-avian feathered dinosaurs were. Brooding eggs, possibly, given the evidence that some feathered theropods sat on their nests in postures remarkably similar to those of modern birds covering their clutches. Feathers were a general-purpose biological technology that proved, eventually, to also work extremely well for flight. And the colours those feathers came in. This is one of the most astonishing recent developments in paleontology, the discovery that we can actually determine the colours of some dinosaur feathers from fossilised melanosomes, the tiny cellular structures that produce pigment in feathers. Sinosauropteryx had a reddish-brown and white striped tail. Microraptor had glossy, iridescent black feathers similar to those of a modern starling. Anchiornis had a pattern of black, white, and reddish-orange. These were not drab, grey-brown, lizard-like animals. They were vividly, beautifully, extravagantly coloured. They were doing with colour what birds do today, signalling, displaying, competing, communicating. This tells us something important about dinosaurian social life. Colour this specific and this elaborate is almost always associated with complex social behaviour. It suggests visual communication between individuals of the same species. It suggests the kind of behavioural richness that we associate with socially complex animals. It suggests that the ancestors of birds were already living in something like the layered, behaviourally rich social world that birds inhabit today. And that social richness, that behavioural complexity, carried through the extinction boundary 66 million years ago and diversified into the extraordinary variety of bird behaviours we see in the living world. the elaborate courtship dances of birds of paradise, the tool use of crows and ravens, the sophisticated navigation of migratory species that find their way across thousands of miles without maps, the colony breeding of penguins and albatrosses and flamingos with their complex social hierarchies and coordinated behaviours, the remarkable vocal learning of songbirds, who learn their songs from adults the way human children learn language, the only other major group of animals in which this kind of complex vocal learning has evolved. All of this is the dinosaurian inheritance playing out in the living present. The intelligence, the social complexity, the behavioural richness of modern birds is not something that evolved after the dinosaurs were gone. It is the continuation and elaboration of a behavioural tradition that was already well established in the theropod dinosaurs before the asteroid hit. The crow using tools is doing something that some of its ancestors were probably already doing in the Cretaceous. The songbird learning its song from a parent is practicing a form of cultural transmission that likely has deep roots in the complex social world of feathered theropods. There is a specific bird behaviour that is particularly resonant when viewed in this light. Many bird species, when they feel secure and comfortable, have a characteristic resting posture, in which they tuck their head under their wing or back, close their eyes, and settle into a very specific kind of stillness. It is a resting posture that is completely identical, in its structural essentials, to the resting postures of feathered theropod dinosaurs as preserved in certain remarkable fossils from China. Ancient birds and small feathered dinosaurs, frozen in that same head-tucked back sleeping posture, the same posture that your cat adopts, the same posture that you perhaps make some version of yourself in the deepest part of sleep. The sleeping posture of dinosaurs, preserved in ancient rock, echoed in 10,000 species of living birds, and perhaps faintly echoed in the way your body instinctively curls toward rest. That is a thread of continuity so long and so unbroken that it is almost dizzying to contemplate in the quiet of the night. But birds are not the only way that living dinosaurs are present in your daily world, because the dinosaurian legacy is woven into the ecosystems that sustain your life in ways that most people never pause to consider. The forests that produce the oxygen you breathe, the soils that grow the food you eat, the complex web of ecological relationships that keeps the living world running, all of these bear the marks of the long dinosaurian influence. The flowering plants, the angiosperms, which today dominate terrestrial vegetation and provide the vast majority of human food, evolved during the Cretaceous period. They evolved in a world of dinosaurs, and the relationship between early flowering plants and the animals of the Cretaceous shaped the trajectory of their evolution in fundamental ways. The fruits and seeds of flowering plants are in large part an evolutionary response to the presence of animals that could disperse them. The earliest fruit-bearing plants evolved fleshy, nutritious coverings around their seeds because animals would eat those fruits, carry the seeds to new locations, and deposit them in their droppings, giving the plants a free dispersal service in exchange for the nutritional reward of the fruit. Those early fruit-eating, seed-dispersing animals of the Cretaceous included birds, dinosaurs, and small mammals. The partnership between flowering plants and vertebrate animals that began in the Cretaceous is one of the most important ecological relationships in the history of life on Earth. It produced the extraordinary diversity of fruit-bearing plants we see today, the enormous variety of flavours and colours and structures of fruits, each one refined by millions of years of coevolution with the animals that ate them and spread their seeds. You eat apples and mangoes and berries and grapes, and you are participating in a partnership that was being forged by small theropod dinosaurs and early birds, and the flowering plants they helped to spread across the Cretaceous world. The sweetness of fruit is a Cretaceous invention. The colours that make ripe fruit visually appealing evolved to appeal to the colour vision of birds and other vertebrates. The entire system of fruit-eating and seed dispersal that moves plant genes across landscapes was assembled in the age of dinosaurs and runs today in the living world with all the same participants. The birds, the descendants of those ancient seed dispersers, still doing what their ancestors did in the Cretaceous. There is something very gentle and very beautiful about this kind of continuity when you let yourself feel it. Not continuity as a fixed, unchanging repetition, but continuity as a living thread that runs through time and changes as it runs but never breaks. The connection between the first small theropod that ate a proto-fruit in the Cretaceous and the bird that ate the berry from your garden this morning is real. The thread is unbroken. It runs through 150 million years of evolution and comes out the other side still recognizably what it was at the beginning. Let that long thread of life carry you a little further into rest. There is no urgency here. The connections we are tracing are older than any urgency the modern world can produce. In the company of the dinosaurian lineage, everything human resolves to something small and passing and gentle. The birds singing in the first light of morning just before you wake, the crows that watch from rooftops with their ancient intelligent eyes, the tiny wren picking its way through the undergrowth with precise, quick movements, the heron standing motionless at the water's edge, patient as deep time. They are all here, still carrying the inheritance, still living the long, unbroken story that began in the Triassic and has never once stopped. You are breathing the same air, you are living in the same world, you are part of the same story by a different but connected thread. And as we move deeper into the night, we will trace more of those threads. We will follow them into the biology of your own body, into the history of the Earth itself, into the strange and layered territory where deep time intersects with human memory and imagination and meaning. But for now, let the birds carry the story. Let the ancient, ongoing presence of the dinosaurian lineage be a comfort rather than a wonder. They are not strange, they are family. And they have been here, singing and flying and watching for 230 million years. You are safe in their world. You have always been safe in their world. Rest a little more. There is a version of the story of life on Earth in which the asteroid that struck 66 million years ago is simply a disaster, in which it is nothing but loss. The loss of the non-avian dinosaurs, the loss of the flying pterosaurs, the loss of the marine reptiles, the loss of enormous swathes of marine and terrestrial biodiversity that had taken hundreds of millions of years to assemble. In this version, the end of the Cretaceous is a tragedy, and everything that came after is a recovery. This version is true as far as it goes. The impact was catastrophic. The loss was enormous. The world that existed before the end Cretaceous event was genuinely extraordinary, and much of what was lost has never been recovered. But there is another version of the story that is equally true, and that reveals a different kind of meaning in the same events. In this version, the asteroid that ended the non-avian dinosaurs was also the event that made you possible. That opened the ecological space into which your ancestors could expand. That removed the competitive dominance of the large-bodied dinosaurs and allowed the small, warm-blooded, large-brained mammals who had been living in the shadows for 150 million years to finally have their moment. That created the conditions for the rapid evolutionary diversification that produced the enormous variety of mammal forms alive today, including the primate lineage, including the hominin lineage, including you. In this version, the asteroid is not just catastrophe. It is also, seen from the long perspective of evolutionary history, a kind of gift, an extraordinary, terrible, unintended gift, the gift of ecological space, the gift of a world suddenly available for new kinds of life to explore, the gift, ultimately, of possibility. This second version does not negate the first. The tragedy and the gift are both real. The loss and the possibility are both true. Evolutionary history does not resolve into simple moral narratives, and we should not try to force it to. But when you are lying quietly in the dark, tracing the deep connections between your existence and the long history of life on Earth, it is worth holding both truths at once, worth feeling both the weight of what was lost and the improbable wonder of what grew from that loss. So let us go back to that extraordinary moment 66 million years ago. Let us approach it as gently as the story allows, and trace what happened and understand what it means for the world you inhabit. The world of the late Cretaceous was, by any measure, spectacular. The non-avian dinosaurs had been diversifying for more than 160 million years, and they had reached a peak of variety and sophistication that we are still only beginning to appreciate. Vast herds of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, moving across floodplains rich with flowering plants. Ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, grazing in groups in forests of conifers and early angiosperms, their elaborate head displays marking the boundaries of their social hierarchies. Ankylosaurs carrying their armoured shells through the undergrowth with massive, unhurried deliberation. Pachycephalosaurs with their thickened dome skulls, perhaps engaging in the kind of head-butting contest that defines social dominance in many modern ungulates. and hunting all of these, the great theropods, Tyrannosaurus rex and its relatives, the apex predators of the northern hemisphere of the late Cretaceous, towering carnivores whose combination of power and sensory acuity and, recent evidence suggests, possible social hunting behaviour made them perhaps the most formidable predators that have ever walked on land. Smaller, faster theropods in the form of the dromaeosaurs, the raptors, hunting in groups with a combination of intelligence and speed and coordination that we can only partially infer from fossil evidence, but that speaks, through the evidence of their brain structures and their grasping hands and their binocular vision, of animals that were cognitively formidable. And above all of them, the birds, already diversified into dozens of ecological roles by the late Cretaceous, seabirds and shorebirds and forest birds and possibly even something like songbirds, diversity that would survive the coming catastrophe and explode on the other side of it into the 10,000 species alive today. The world was full. Every ecological niche was occupied. Every resource was being harvested. The large terrestrial herbivore niches were held by the horned dinosaurs and the hadrosaurs. The apex predator niche was held by the tyrannosaurs. The small-bodied terrestrial insectivore niche was held by small theropods and hiding in their shadows the early mammals. And then the asteroid came. It hit the Yucatan Peninsula of what is now Mexico in a shallow sea. The rock was perhaps 10 to 15 kilometers across. It was traveling at approximately 20 kilometers per second when it hit. The energy released was approximately 70 to 100 million megatons. For comparison, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated released approximately 50 megatons. The Chicxulub impact released 2 million times more energy than that, in less than a second. The immediate effects were local but catastrophic. A fireball that vaporized everything for hundreds of kilometers, a shockwave that circled the globe, a tsunami that spread across every ocean basin. But the global effects that followed were what killed the dinosaurs. The impact threw an enormous quantity of debris into the atmosphere, vaporized rock and steam and dust, soot from wildfires ignited by the thermal pulse that circled the globe, sulfur aerosols from the sulfur-rich rocks of the impact site. This material spread through the upper atmosphere and blocked sunlight, globally, for months to years. Temperatures dropped, photosynthesis slowed, and in many regions essentially stopped. The food web began to collapse from the bottom. The non-avian dinosaurs were large animals. Large animals need a lot of food. Large animals cannot survive extended periods of food shortage by hibernating or going dormant the way small animals can. Large animals cannot shift their diets quickly enough to accommodate the sudden disappearance of the plant communities they depended on. Large animals, when the food web collapses, die. The birds that survived were small. They could find food sources, seeds, insects, perhaps small invertebrates, that persisted through the worst of the environmental disruption. Their small bodies needed little fuel. Their warm blood allowed them to remain active in cold conditions. They made it. The mammals that survived were also small. For the same reasons, plus one additional advantage, many mammal lineages could go into a state of physiological dormancy that allowed them to survive extended periods with minimal food. The combination of small size, warm blood, dietary flexibility, and the option to hibernate when conditions became extreme gave the small mammals of the late Cretaceous the toolkit they needed to get through the worst of the post-impact winter. And when the skies cleared, when the dust settled and the sunlight returned and the plants began to grow again, the world those survivors emerged into was almost unrecognizable. The large-bodied dinosaurs were gone, the pterosaurs were gone, the marine reptiles were gone, the ecological structures that had been stable for tens of millions of years were gone, and in their place was something that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth, a world with a great diversity of vacant ecological niches and a community of small, warm-blooded, cognitively flexible survivors ready to fill them. What happened next is one of the most rapid and dramatic evolutionary radiations in the history of life. Within the first 10 to 15 million years of the Paleocene epoch, the mammals diversified from a community of mostly small, mostly insectivorous forms into an astonishing variety of body sizes, diets, and ecological roles. Large herbivores appeared to fill the niches left by the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians. Large carnivores appeared to fill the niches left by the tyrannosaurs. Aquatic mammals began their long journey toward the whales and dolphins they would eventually become. Tree-dwelling mammals diversified into the primates. The primates. That is the lineage that concerns us most directly tonight, because it is the lineage that eventually produced you. The early primates were small, tree-dwelling animals with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes that gave them binocular, depth-perceiving vision suited to moving through the complex three-dimensional world of forest canopy. They were almost certainly insectivores to begin with, but their cognitive flexibility quickly enabled dietary diversification into fruits and leaves and other plant materials. Their hands, evolved for gripping branches, were also capable of manipulating objects with a precision that set them apart from most other mammals. Over tens of millions of years, the primate lineage diversified. Some lineages became increasingly large and increasingly sophisticated in their cognitive and social lives. The great apes, the lineage that includes chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans and humans, were the culmination of this process. And within the great ape lineage, the hominin branch, the branch that led specifically to humans, began its extraordinary journey toward language and culture and self-awareness perhaps 6 to 7 million years ago. None of this would have been possible without the asteroid, without the removal of the dinosaurian competitive dominance that kept the mammals small and marginal for 150 million years, without the gift of ecological space that the extinction event created, without the particular combination of catastrophe and opportunity that the end Cretaceous event represented for the survivors. You are here because of that event, not despite it, because of it. The specific conditions that produced the primate lineage and ultimately the hominin lineage and ultimately you required the non-avian dinosaurs to be gone, required the large-bodied Mesozoic world to collapse, required the ecological space to open up for something new. This is not to say that the extinction was good or desirable or anything other than the catastrophe it was. The loss of the non-avian dinosaurs was a genuine loss. The world they inhabited was genuinely extraordinary. The organisms that died in the months after the impact, quietly and without comprehension of what was happening to them, were not served by that dying. They simply died. But the long view of evolutionary history reveals that endings and beginnings are woven together in ways that resist simple moral categorization. The ending of the Cretaceous world was the beginning of the Cenozoic world. The death of the non-avian dinosaurs was the birth of the mammalian radiation, and out of that radiation eventually came a small, upright, large-brained primate who lies down at night in a warm, sheltered place and tries to understand the ancient story that made it possible for them to exist at all. That primate is you, and the story goes deeper still. Because the connection between the asteroid event and the human animal is not just ecological, not just about who filled which niche after the Great Extinction. It is also physiological, also cognitive, also, in a quiet and profound way, behavioral. Remember those 150 million years of mammalian evolution in the shadow of the dinosaurs. Remember what that long experience selected for. The small, careful, warm-blooded, night-active, socially connected, cognitively flexible animal that your ancestors were. The particular combination of traits that let them survive alongside the dinosaurs, and then, when the dinosaurs were gone, quickly diversify into the empty world. Those traits did not disappear when the dinosaurs were gone. They were the foundation upon which everything that came after was built. The intelligence that allowed early mammals to navigate a complex, predator-filled world became, with further development, the remarkable cognitive flexibility of primates. The social bonding that kept small mammals warm and safe in their nighttime burrows became, with elaboration, the extraordinarily complex social lives of great apes and humans. The vocal communication that allowed early mammals to find each other in the dark became, with refinement, the extraordinary gift of human language. Everything that makes you characteristically human has roots that run back through the Paleocene and the Cretaceous and the Mesozoic. Roots that were shaped by the presence of the dinosaurs and then by their absence. Roots that connect your most distinctively human qualities to a history far older and far more complex than most people ever pause to consider. And sitting quietly with that knowledge, in the gentle dark, there is something that feels very much like recognition. Like finding out that a story you have been living your whole life has chapters you never knew about. like discovering that the walls of the house you grew up in go down much deeper into the earth than you realized, all the way down to foundations laid in unimaginably ancient time. Let that foundation hold you. It has been doing so for a very long time. Imagine, for a moment, that you could take the human brain apart layer by layer. Not literally, not surgically, but conceptually. Imagine peeling back the most recently evolved structures and exposing the older ones underneath. Imagine being able to read the brain the way a geologist reads a rock formation, identifying each layer by its age and its origin, and the evolutionary history that produced it. What you would find, if you could do this, is a structure of extraordinary historical depth, a structure that reads, layer by layer, as a record of the history of vertebrate life on Earth, a structure in which the deepest, oldest layers carry functions that are almost identical to those carried by the same brain regions in fish and reptiles and birds, functions that were already ancient when the first dinosaurs walked the Earth, functions that have been conserved by evolution because they are too fundamental to life to be modified without catastrophic consequences. The brain stem, the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, the limbic system, the cortex. Each of these major divisions of the brain has a different evolutionary age, a different origin, a different history, and each of them carries, somewhere in its architecture and its function, the marks of the long history of vertebrate life. The brain stem is the oldest. It manages the absolutely fundamental life support functions: breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, the basic regulation of arousal and consciousness, the essential machinery of staying alive. These functions were already present in the earliest vertebrates 500 million years ago. They are managed in virtually the same way in fish and reptiles and birds and mammals. You share your basic life support circuitry with every vertebrate that has ever lived, including the dinosaurs, every Tyrannosaurus that ever breathed, every Brachiosaurus that ever swung its long neck, every Velociraptor that ever moved quickly through underbrush, breathed and maintained its circulation using brain structures homologous to the ones managing those same functions in you right now. That's a strange and quiet kind of intimacy. The machinery keeping you alive tonight is essentially the same machinery that kept the great dinosaurs alive in their time, refined and modified over hundreds of millions of years, yes, but the same in its fundamental organization, the same in its basic approach to the problem of staying alive. Above the brainstem, the cerebellum manages motor coordination, the smooth, automatic, precise execution of complex physical movements that we do not need to think about consciously, walking, for instance, or the way your hand moves without conscious guidance when you reach for something familiar. The cerebellum learns motor programs through practice and executes them automatically, freeing the conscious mind for other things. This function, too, is ancient and conserved. The dinosaurs had cerebella. Their movements, particularly those of the theropods, were highly coordinated. The rapid, precise movements of pursuit predators require extremely sophisticated motor control. The same basic neural system that allowed a velociraptor to make rapid, coordinated adjustments as it ran and turned is present in your brain, managing the movements you make without thinking about them. Moving higher, the limbic system, this is the center of emotional processing and memory formation. The amygdala, which processes fear and other emotionally significant stimuli. The hippocampus, which consolidates memories and helps navigate space. The hypothalamus, which regulates basic drives like hunger and thirst and reproductive behavior. These structures are present in some form in all vertebrates. They are ancient, and in mammals they have been significantly elaborated compared to reptiles, giving mammals their relatively rich emotional lives and social complexity. Here is where the dinosaur connection becomes psychologically interesting, because the mammalian elaboration of the limbic system, the expansion of emotional processing capacity, the deepening of memory systems, the intensification of social bonding, was not an accident. It was, as we have discussed, shaped by 150 million years of mammalian existence alongside dinosaurs. The fear system is a particularly clear example. The mammalian fear response, the rapid, largely unconscious appraisal of environmental stimuli for potential threat, the automatic preparation of the body for fight or flight, the consolidation of fear memories so that dangerous situations can be recognized and avoided in the future, is an extraordinarily well-developed system in mammals, more developed in many respects than in reptiles. And the conditions that shaped that development were the conditions of Mesozoic life. Small, vulnerable, warm-blooded animals living in a world of large, powerful predators, where the cost of a slow or inadequate fear response was death. The hypervigilance that is part of the mammalian character. The hair-trigger fear system that activates before conscious thought can intervene. The tendency to startle at unexpected sounds or movements. The discomfort in large, open, exposed spaces. The comfort of small, enclosed, protected spaces. All of these are mammalian characteristics that were shaped, refined, and maintained by millions of years of living as small animals in a world of dinosaurian predators. They persist in you today, not because they are optimally suited to the modern world. In many cases, they produce responses that are unnecessary or even counterproductive in contemporary human environments. But because evolution does not discard working systems simply because the original selective pressure is gone, the fear system that was calibrated by the Mesozoic world is still largely present in the mammalian brain, including the human brain. The dinosaurs shaped your fear response and then went extinct, but the shape they gave it remains. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The next time you feel a prickle of anxiety in an open space, or a sense of comfort and safety in a small enclosed room, or a reflexive flinch at an unexpected sound in the night, those responses are ancient. They are not personal failings or modern anxieties. They are the inheritance of 150 million years of small mammal survival in the age of dinosaurs. They are your nervous system doing what it was built to do by the most ancient and effective teacher that evolution has ever known. The sustained experience of living alongside creatures who would eat you if you let your guard down. The sleep system itself carries this history. Mammals sleep differently from most other vertebrates. They sleep more deeply, in a more organized way, with more clearly defined stages. They have rapid eye movement sleep, the state associated with dreaming, which is present in birds as well, those living dinosaurs, sharing another ancient neural trait with their mammalian companions, but is organized differently in mammals than in reptiles. The specific structure of mammalian sleep, with its cycles of deep sleep and REM sleep and lighter sleep stages, is thought to be related to the demands of mammalian memory consolidation and neural maintenance, and the conditions under which mammals feel most able to enter that deep sleep. Warmth, darkness, enclosure, safety, the presence of others of their kind, were shaped by the conditions of the Mesozoic. Safe sleep for the small mammals of the Cretaceous meant hidden sleep. It meant a burrow or a crevice or a hollow, somewhere enclosed and protected where a sleeping animal's body heat would not be detected, where an animal could enter the vulnerable state of deep sleep with some confidence that it would not be eaten. The brain systems that encourage sleep under those specific conditions, the neurochemistry of warmth and darkness and safety, were calibrated by the experience of sleeping through Cretaceous nights, small and hidden and warm, while the world above was full of things that could kill you. You are using those same systems right now. The warmth of your covering, the darkness of the room, the quiet. Your brain is reading these conditions through neural systems that were calibrated by the Mesozoic and responding with the ancient appropriate signal, sleep now, this is safe, this is the time. The circadian rhythm that tells you when to sleep and when to wake is another thread of this ancient heritage. Mammals are ancestrally nocturnal, though many lineages, including the human one, have since shifted to daytime activity. The earliest mammals were night shift animals, active in the dark hours when the large diurnal dinosaurs were less active and less dangerous. The mammalian circadian system, the internal biological clock that synchronizes behavior and physiology with the day-night cycle, was shaped by the experience of a creature whose safest hours were the dark ones. The specific chemistry of the mammalian sleep system, the role of melatonin in triggering sleep onset, the sensitivity of the circadian clock to light levels, these are systems calibrated by millions of years of nocturnal mammalian life in the Mesozoic. They are the biological expression of the small mammal lifestyle that the dinosaurs made necessary. And the dreams you have in REM sleep, the neural rehearsal of experiences, the memory consolidation, the emotional processing that happens in the sleeping brain. The bird brain does something functionally similar during its REM-like sleep states. The same basic neural process, running in theropod descendants and in you, in the sleeping dark night after night for 200 million years. You are woven into this ancient story far more intimately than the distance of geological time suggests. The neurons firing in your brain right now as you move towards sleep are firing in patterns shaped by the Mesozoic world. The chemistry putting you to sleep is the chemistry of a small mammal in a Cretaceous burrow. The safety your body is registering in this quiet, enclosed, warm moment is the same safety your ancestors registered in the long dark nights of the age of dinosaurs. Let that ancient safety carry you deeper. There is nothing to do now but follow the long pull of sleep. Your brain knows how. It has known how for a very, very long time. There is a cave in France, deep in the Dordogne region, called Lascaux. On its walls, painted 17,000 years ago by human hands, using pigments of ochre and manganese and charcoal, are images of animals. Horses and aurochs and deer and bison, and a strange, large-antlered creature that may be a megalopterus, an extinct giant deer. These paintings are among the oldest known examples of representative art, and they have moved every person who has ever seen them in the original, in the deep quiet of that ancient cave, in the company of those painted animals on the walls. What is remarkable about the Lascaux paintings is not just their antiquity or their technical sophistication, extraordinary as both of those things are. What is remarkable is what they tell us about the human relationship with the animal world. 17,000 years ago, in a period of enormous environmental uncertainty, during the last great ice age when the world was colder and more challenging than anything we have experienced in recorded history, the people of Lascaux spent their time, their precious time, painting animals, not just tracking them or hunting them, which would have been essential for survival, painting them, documenting them with care and skill and evident emotional investment, creating images that capture not just the physical appearance of the animals, but something of their quality, their presence, their essential nature. This is what humans do. We are the animals who notice other animals. We are the species that pays attention to the creatures around us, with a depth and consistency and emotional engagement that goes far beyond what is required for hunting or avoiding predators. We are watchers. We are recorders. We are the species that names every creature we encounter and builds stories around them and gives them places in our cosmologies and mythologies and creation narratives. And if the humans of 17,000 years ago were painting the animals they lived alongside, what were the humans who came before them doing? What were the Homo sapiens and their predecessors doing for the 300,000 years before Lascaux? And what were the hominins who preceded modern humans doing in the millions of years of the Pliocene and Pleistocene? Among other things, they were finding fossils. The ancient world was full of fossils. They were not rare or difficult to encounter for people who lived close to the land and moved through eroding landscapes regularly. Bone fragments and tooth fragments and strange mineral concretions in the shapes of animals would have been common finds for people walking riverbanks and rocky hillsides. And the ancient humans who found them would have done exactly what humans do. They would have noticed them, thought about them, told stories about them. Adrienne Mayer, a folklorist and historian of science, has spent decades documenting the ways in which ancient peoples around the world encountered fossils and incorporated them into their mythologies and cosmologies. Her research reveals a pattern that is both deeply human and quietly astonishing. The ancient peoples of Greece, of Central Asia, of China, of the Americas, of Africa regularly encountered the fossil remains of large animals, dinosaurs, mammoths, giant ground sloths, ancient birds, and understood them as the evidence of extraordinary creatures, not just as strange rocks, as the remains of beings. The griffin, that composite creature of Greek mythology with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, may have originated from fossil discoveries in the Gobi Desert region. The Gobi is extraordinarily rich in dinosaur fossils. It was one of the most productive dinosaur environments of the Cretaceous, and many of those fossils erode naturally to the surface where they are easily found. Protoceratops, a Cretaceous dinosaur that lived in the Gobi, has a beak-like structure, four-limbed body plan, large claws, and a distinctive crest, characteristics that, if you were reconstructing the creature from scattered skeletal elements, might indeed produce something very much like the description of a griffin. The ancient Scythian nomads who roamed those regions, according to Mayer's research, described the griffins as real creatures whose remains could be found in the desert. They were not making up mythology out of nothing. They were telling stories about fossils. The dragons of European, Asian, and otherworld mythologies may similarly draw on fossil discoveries. The dragon is one of the most widespread mythological creatures in human culture. Some version of it appears in the legends of cultures on every inhabited continent, and everywhere in the world where dragons appear in folklore there are also rich fossil beds. The long, sinuous, serpentine forms of many dragon depictions are reminiscent of the skeletons of large dinosaurs as they are found in the field, articulated or semi-articulated, the long spine curving through the rock in exactly the posture that might suggest a serpentine creature of enormous size. In China, where the tradition of dragon mythology is ancient and elaborate, fossil dinosaur bones were historically known as dragon bones and were used in traditional medicine. The Chinese word for dinosaur, konglong, literally means terrible dragon. The connection between dinosaur fossils and dragon mythology in China is explicit in the historical record, traceable through centuries of documented encounters with fossil beds. In Greece, where the mythology of giants and monsters was richly developed, the fossil beds of the Mediterranean and Aegean regions produced enormous quantities of large mammal bones, elephants, mastodons, hippos, giant deer, as well as dinosaur and marine reptile fossils. Adrienne Mayer has documented specific fossil beds in Greece, where mythological giants were supposedly buried, finding that the locations correspond exactly to rich fossil sites. The stories of Homeric heroes, of titans and giants and monsters, were at least partially rooted in the actual discovery and interpretation of enormous fossilized bones. This is not to say that mythology is nothing but misinterpreted paleontology. Mythology is enormously complex and serves many purposes simultaneously, but it does suggest that the human fascination with dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures is not a product of modern scientific culture. It is ancient. It goes back to the beginning of human cognitive sophistication, to the first hominins who picked up a strange, heavy, animal-shaped stone and wondered where it came from. The people of Lascaux knew nothing of dinosaurs in the scientific sense. They had no concept of deep geological time, no framework for understanding that the Earth was billions of years old, no access to the enormous fossil record that modern paleontology has assembled. But they lived in a world where the bones of ancient animals eroded out of hillsides and riverbanks regularly, and they made stories about them. They put those stories into the structures of their cosmologies. They made the ancient creatures part of the fabric of their understanding of the world. And in doing so, they were doing something that is deeply and characteristically human. They were making connection. They were reaching across the distance that separates the present from the past and finding something to hold on to. They were recognizing in the enormous mineralized bones of creatures long gone the evidence of a world deeper and stranger and more varied than the one they themselves inhabited, and they were incorporating that recognition into the stories that gave their lives meaning. That impulse is still present in us. When a child sees a dinosaur skeleton in a museum for the first time and goes completely still, wide-eyed, their mouth slightly open, processing something their nervous system registers as important, they are having a genuinely ancestral experience. They are participating in a human tradition of wonder at the remains of ancient creatures that goes back as far as human cognition itself. The feeling that rises in them is not just personal, it is cultural and biological and ancestral all at once. The specific nature of human fascination with dinosaurs goes beyond the simple fact that they are large and extinct. There is something in the dinosaur that speaks to deep human preoccupations. The question of dominance, who rules the world, is one of the oldest human questions, and the dinosaurs offer a profound answer to it. They ruled for 165 million years. Then they were gone. That story, the story of great power meeting its ending, is one of the most fundamental narrative structures in human culture. It appears in myths of fallen civilizations and defeated giants, and great heroes brought low. It appears in every culture's stories about the past, and the dinosaurs embody it in the most literal and complete way possible. There is also the question of scale. Humans are fascinated by things that are larger than we are, particularly when those things were once alive. The great dinosaurs were enormous by any standard, the largest land animals that have ever existed, and there is something in the human imagination that reaches toward enormousness. That wants to understand it. That wants to stand in the presence of something that makes ordinary human scale seem small. The dinosaur skeletons in their museum halls are temples in this sense, places where we go to be small in the presence of something ancient and large and gone. And there is the question of time. The 165 million years of dinosaurian dominance are simply incomprehensible to the ordinary human mind. We cannot hold that number meaningfully, we cannot feel it, and yet we reach for it. We try to wrap our imaginations around it. We lie awake at night sometimes and try to feel the weight of geological time pressing gently down on us, and the feeling we get is not so much comprehension as awe, a particular quality of awe that is perhaps the closest the human mind can come to directly experiencing deep time. That reaching, that attempt, is itself an ancient human impulse. The impulse to understand one's position in a history that is much larger than one's own individual life. To situate oneself in a story that began long before you arrived and will continue long after you're gone. To know that you are not the first and not the last, but part of a long, continuous, extraordinary process. The dinosaurs in human culture serve as our deepest available mirror for this impulse. They are the furthest back we can reach in our cultural imagining of the living world. They are the ancient ones, the ones who came before, the ones who show us by their enormousness and their duration and their ending, that the story of life is so much larger than anything we can contain in a single human lifetime, or a single human culture, or even the entirety of human history. And here is something worth holding in the quiet of the night. The relationship between humans and dinosaurs in culture is not one-directional. It is not just humans looking back at the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are also, in a sense, part of what made the humans who look at them. The selection pressures they created shaped mammalian and ultimately human biology. The ecological legacies they left shaped the world that human cultures evolved within. The fossil record they produced gave human imagination something to work with, something to build stories around. The dinosaurs created conditions for human existence, and human existence responds by creating conditions for the dinosaurs to be remembered. We are the species that looks back. We are the species that says, those creatures existed, and their existence was extraordinary, and we will not let it be forgotten. We will dig their bones from the rock and reconstruct their bodies and try to understand their lives and give them names and build places where others can come and stand before their remains and feel the appropriate awe. That is a genuinely strange and beautiful thing for an animal to do, and it is what makes humans specifically human. Not just intelligence, not just language, but the impulse to reach backward through time and make connection with the creatures who came before, to recognize in their bones a world that produced our world, and to feel, in the quiet moment of that recognition, something very much like kinship. The dinosaurs are ours in this way, not because we own them or control them or have any particular authority over their memory, but because we are the ones who remember them. We are the ones who pulled them out of the rock and gave them back their names. We are the ones who look at a crow and think, you are them, you are still here. And that recognition, ancient and human and quietly profound, is one of the most beautiful things about being the kind of animal that we are. Lie very still for a moment and breathe. Just breathe. Notice the air coming in. Notice the subtle chemistry of it, the oxygen that powers every process in your body, the exact mixture of gases that the human body requires to function. Notice how easy it is, how automatic, how perfectly calibrated the world seems for the act of breathing. That calibration did not happen by accident. It is the product of hundreds of millions of years of life reshaping the atmosphere through the chemistry of photosynthesis and respiration and decomposition and burial. And the specific mixture of gases in Earth's atmosphere today, the precise levels of oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide that make your particular kind of life possible, was shaped in significant part by the biological processes that dominated the Mesozoic era. The age of dinosaurs. This is one of the least visible but most fundamental ways in which the dinosaurian world is present in your daily life. The air you breathe is in part the legacy of Mesozoic ecosystems. The oxygen in it was produced in significant part by photosynthetic organisms living in Mesozoic oceans and on Mesozoic land. The carbon dioxide levels, so critical to the functioning of the global climate system, were modulated through the Mesozoic by the same carbon cycle processes, geological, biological, chemical, that operate today, running through the same fundamental mechanisms that were running then. But let us move from the atmosphere to the more immediately visible legacies. Let us look at what the dinosaurian world left in the ecosystems you actually inhabit. Start with the soil under any temperate forest. Pick it up in your imagination. Feel its weight, its darkness, its crumbling richness. That soil is the product of millions of years of biological activity, the decomposition of plant material, the activity of earthworms and fungi and bacteria, and the vast community of organisms that break down dead matter and recycle its nutrients, the root activity of generations of trees, loosening and aerating and chemically transforming the rock beneath, the accumulation of organic material from millions of years of falling leaves and dying organisms. The specific soil communities of today's temperate forests have deep roots in Mesozoic forest ecology. The fungal networks that underlie forest soils, the mycorrhizal networks that connect trees and allow them to share nutrients and chemical signals, the underground internet of the forest as it is sometimes called, these networks evolved in the Mesozoic period. The deep, ancient partnership between land plants and soil fungi goes back at least 400 million years, predating the dinosaurs, but it was elaborated and diversified throughout the Mesozoic in the context of dinosaurian forest ecosystems. The fungi that help the trees in your neighbourhood communicate underground are the descendants of fungi that were doing the same thing for the forest that dinosaurs moved through. The conifers. Look at any significant forest in the northern hemisphere, or the high mountains of the southern hemisphere, and you are likely looking at conifers, pines, spruces, firs, cedars, larches. These are Mesozoic trees. They evolved and diversified during the Triassic and Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, in the company of dinosaurs. The enormous conifer forests of the Jurassic, which covered vast regions of the warm Mesozoic world, were partly shaped by their relationship with the dinosaurs that moved through them. The large herbivorous sauropods, those enormous long-necked dinosaurs, browsed on the foliage of these conifers, creating selective pressures that influence the growth forms and chemical defences of Mesozoic plant communities in ways that echo forward to the forests of today. The chemical ecology of modern conifers, the resins and terpenes and other compounds that give pines their characteristic smell and make them resistant to many insects and pathogens, was partly refined under dinosaurian selection pressure. When you smell pine resin on a warm day, some of the chemical story you're smelling was written in the Mesozoic. That sharp, clean, ancient smell is in part a legacy of the relationship between Jurassic conifers and the animals that browsed them. Amber is another direct physical legacy of the Mesozoic. Amber is fossilized tree resin, and the amber deposits of the world preserve, in extraordinary detail, the organisms of the ancient forest that produced it. Insects, spiders, plant fragments, feathers, sometimes even the occasional small lizard or mammal hair, preserved in 3 dimensions inside ancient resin, giving us windows into ecosystem that existed when dinosaurs were alive. Some of the most spectacular dinosaur-era amber comes from Burma and the Baltic and New Jersey, and the organisms it preserves tell us more about the detail and diversity of Mesozoic life than almost any other type of fossil. One famous and extraordinary piece of Burmese amber contains the feathered tail of a small dinosaur, a tail covered in complex pennaceous feathers of the type that would have been capable of aerodynamic function. The amber preserves the individual feather barbs and barbules in such detail that you can see their structure under a microscope. The feathers are ambiguously coloured, possibly reddish-brown, the pigment partially preserved by the extraordinary chemistry of the amber itself. This is Mesozoic life at a resolution that would have seemed impossible to paleontologists even 20 years ago. An organism that lived approximately 99 million years ago, preserved in such detail that we can see the structure of its feathers. The insects in that amber and in amber deposits around the world are among the most direct physical legacies of the Mesozoic in the modern world. Many of the insect groups preserved in Cretaceous amber have direct living descendants that look remarkably similar to their ancient ancestors. The stasis in some insect lineages is extraordinary. Some groups appear to have changed very little in their basic organisation over 70 or 80 million years. The crane flies and midges and beetles and ants of the Cretaceous amber look, to a non-specialist eye, much like the crane flies and midges and beetles and ants of your own backyard. Their basic body plans, their basic ecological roles, their basic relationships to plants and decomposing organic matter, all of these were established in the Mesozoic and persist with remarkable fidelity today. The flowering plants, as we have discussed, were a Cretaceous innovation, but the full consequence of their evolution is worth lingering over. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, are today the dominant form of plant life on Earth. They have diversified into approximately 300,000 known species. They include every cereal grain that feeds the human population, every fruit tree, every vegetable, every flowering plant in every garden and meadow and hedgerow. They produce the oxygen, the food, the fibre, the medicines, the materials that human civilization is built upon. And they evolved in the Cretaceous, in a world of dinosaurs, and their early diversification was shaped by their relationships with Cretaceous animals. The flowering plant radiation of the Cretaceous was tied to the evolution of insect pollinators, the bees and flies and beetles and butterflies that evolved alongside the flowers they visited. It was also tied to the vertebrate seed dispersers, the early birds and small mammals who ate fruits and spread seeds. The three-way relationship between flowering plants, insect pollinators, and vertebrate seed dispersers that underlies the structure of most modern terrestrial ecosystems was assembled in the Cretaceous period. It is a Mesozoic invention that sustains most of the life on the surface of this planet, including human life. Every time you eat, you're eating the fruits of Cretaceous evolutionary innovation. The apple and the wheat and the rice and the tomato are all descendants of Cretaceous flowering plants, refined by millions of years of evolution, and more recently by human cultivation, but structurally and biochemically rooted in Cretaceous biology. Your body is built from nutrients harvested from organisms whose basic biochemistry was shaped in the age of dinosaurs. The coal seams that powered the Industrial Revolution and the oil and natural gas deposits that still power most of global civilization are a different kind of Mesozoic legacy. These fossil fuels are the compressed and chemically transformed remains of ancient organisms, marine organisms mostly, the plankton and algae of ancient Mesozoic seas, buried and transformed over tens of millions of years by heat and pressure into the hydrocarbons that we extract and burn today. When you use energy derived from fossil fuels, you are using the chemical energy stored in the bodies of ancient organisms, many of them from the Mesozoic era, released by combustion into the atmosphere. The carbon in those ancient organisms was fixed from atmospheric carbon dioxide by photosynthesis, removed from the active carbon cycle, and buried. The burning of fossil fuels returns that ancient carbon to the atmosphere, reversing in decades a process that took hundreds of millions of years. This is one of the most direct ways in which the physical legacy of the Mesozoic world intersects with the modern world, through the energy stored in ancient organic matter and the consequences of its release. But let us return from the global to the immediate. Let us return to the living ecosystems that surround you right now, wherever you are. Because those ecosystems, however modified by human activity, still carry the deep structure of their Mesozoic inheritance. The ecological relationships between predators and prey, the ways that different species partition resources and avoid competition, the structures of food webs and nutrient cycles, the patterns of seasonal change and ecological succession, all of these were shaped by the long history of life that includes the Mesozoic. Many of the fundamental rules by which ecosystems organize themselves were established in the Mesozoic or earlier and have been running continuously ever since. The interactions between birds and flowering plants in your garden, birds eating berries and spreading seeds, birds hunting insects that feed on leaves, birds carrying parasites and being hosts for other organisms, are all expressions of ecological relationships whose deep structure was assembled in the Cretaceous. The birds are still doing what their ancestors did. The plants are still doing what their ancestors did. The insects are still doing what their ancestors did. The whole intricate system is still running, still producing the same basic patterns of energy flow and nutrient cycling, in fundamentally the same way it was running when the non-avian dinosaurs were alive. You are living inside this system. You are one of the animals that the system contains and sustains, and the system is, in its deep structure, a Mesozoic invention, a product of the evolutionary and ecological processes that ran through the age of dinosaurs and came out the other side still largely intact, still organized according to rules established in deep time. The next time you sit outside in a garden or a park or anywhere that living things are abundant around you, try to see the Mesozoic in what is there. See it in the birds and their behaviour. See it in the insects visiting flowers. See it in the trees with their roots running through soil built by millions of years of biological activity. See it in the relationships between things, the ways that different organisms depend on each other and compete with each other and modify each other in the ongoing process of ecological interaction. It is all there, not hidden exactly, not requiring special equipment or knowledge to see, requiring only the willingness to look a little past the surface of the familiar and recognize that what you are looking at is ancient, that the ordinary world you inhabit every day has roots that run down through time much further than you usually bother to look. And there is great comfort in that depth if you let yourself feel it. The world has been doing this for a very long time. The basic processes that sustain life have been running for hundreds of millions of years. The partnerships between organisms, the cycling of nutrients and energy, the slow accumulation of ecological complexity, all of these have persisted through mass extinctions and asteroid impacts and volcanic catastrophes and glaciations. They persist tonight, in the darkness, in the quiet. All around you, the ancient processes are running. Life is doing what it has been doing for hundreds of millions of years. That continuity is real. It is not a metaphor. It is a biological fact, and it is one of the most fundamental reasons that the world is here to sustain you tonight. Rest in that continuity. You are not alone in time. Let the story slow down now. Let the pacing match the approach of sleep. Each sentence a little further from urgency, each image softer than the last. We are going to visit the end of the Cretaceous world one more time, not as a scientific event, but as a meditation. We are going to sit with the ending and let it be what it was, complete, final, and the beginning of something new. Before we finish our journey, there is one more connection worth making, one more thread in the weaving, one more way in which the story of the dinosaurs intersects with the larger story of the universe that produced them and us. The asteroid that ended the non-avian dinosaurs came from space. This is obvious and well known, but the implications of it are worth sitting with for a moment. The rock that changed the history of life on Earth was not a product of the Earth's own geological processes. It was material from elsewhere in the solar system, from the belt of rocky material that orbits between Mars and Jupiter, perturbed from its orbit by the gravitational interactions of the planets over hundreds of millions of years, and eventually by the patient mathematics of orbital mechanics, sent on a trajectory that intersected with the Earth's orbit at a specific moment in geological time. The asteroid was cosmic debris, ancient material formed in the early solar system about 4.5 billion years ago, composed of elements forged in the stellar nuclear synthesis of stars that lived and died before the sun was born. The iron in the asteroid was made in the cores of ancient stars. The nickel and cobalt and iridium, that trace element that marks the KPG boundary in rocks around the world, was assembled by the nuclear processes of stellar evolution and scattered into the universe when its parent star exploded. The iridium in the KPG boundary clay, the physical evidence of the asteroid impact that ended the non-avian dinosaurs and opened the world for the mammals, is stardust. Literally, material forged in stellar nucleosynthesis, scattered by supernovae, incorporated into the early solar system, assembled into the asteroid that struck the Earth 66 million years ago, vaporized by the impact, spread as a thin layer around the entire planet, incorporated into the rock, and now available to be measured in parts per billion by geochemists reading the ancient boundary. And the carbon in your body, the same carbon, every atom of it, forged in stellar cores, scattered by stellar explosions, incorporated into the solar nebula that became the sun and the planets, incorporated into the Earth, cycled through the biosphere for 4 billion years, passing through organism after organism, through rock and ocean and atmosphere, arriving in its current configuration as the organic molecules of your cells. You are, at the most fundamental level, made of stardust. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a precise description of the actual physical origin of the matter that composes your body. The carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and hydrogen and all the other elements that make up your tissues were assembled in stellar processes before the sun existed. They were here before the Earth, before life, before the dinosaurs, before everything we have been discussing tonight. And they will be here after you, after human civilization, after the sun burns out and the earth is engulfed, the matter that currently forms your body will disperse into the universe and eventually, in the fullness of cosmic time, be incorporated into new stars and new planets, and perhaps new forms of life that are as unimaginable to us as we would have been unimaginable to the first self-replicating molecules in the ancient ocean. That is the largest context of the story we have been telling tonight. The biological story of the dinosaurs and the mammals and the humans is nested inside the geological story of the Earth, which is nested inside the astronomical story of the solar system, which is nested inside the cosmic story of the universe itself. The connections run all the way up, not just all the way down. The asteroid that gave us our chance was made of the same stellar material that made us. The iridium that marks the boundary in the rock is as cosmic in its origin as the carbon in your cells. We are all, dinosaurs and mammals and humans and asteroids, expressions of the same underlying physical universe, composed of the same elements, subject to the same physical laws, part of the same 4 billion-year story of stellar material, organizing itself into self-replicating complexity. In the face of that, the distance between humans and dinosaurs begins to feel very small. We are all just different arrangements of the same ancient stardust, different moments in the same ongoing process, different chapters in the same story. Let that thought carry you gently into sleep. You're made of ancient light, of stellar fire, of the patient alchemy of billions of years of cosmic chemistry. You are the universe folded into temporary self-awareness, briefly capable of knowing that it is knowing, briefly capable of feeling the extraordinary improbability and beauty of its own existence. Brief, yes, but here, fully alive, fully connected to everything that has ever been and everything that will be. Sleep now. The universe will continue its patient work while you rest. You have always been safe in it. Good night. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one.